Hello everybody, welcome to BYJU'S 6th, 7th and 8th grade channel. I'm your teacher Aishwarya and I welcome you to this video where we are going to discuss the chapter Body Movements, and that too we will summarize this chapter in under 30 minutes. Now of course this particular video is focused on helping you revise for your examination, which is right around the corner. But in case you want to study this chapter in great detail with amazing visualization, then all you need to do is to make sure that you go to the description of this video. You will find a link to a one shot. So please click on that link so that you can watch the video where we have covered this chapter in great detail. But when you are watching this video where you are revising it for your exams, make it a point you have your textbooks ready so that you can mark all the important pointers. So without wasting any more time, students, we will get started. So first and foremost, when you look at the chapter Body Movements, you need to understand what do we mean by movement. And there comes another term that comes into the picture, which is locomotion. So is movement and locomotion the same or different? And where do we see movement and locomotion? So these are some questions that we are going to answer. First up, let us understand what do we mean by movement. Movement is nothing but the change in position of a body part with respect to the whole body of the organism. So if I have my hand here and I move my hand left and right, what is happening? There is a change in position of my hand with respect to my whole body, right? My whole body is there as it is in one point, but my hand is moving, right? I will not say my hand is locomoting, but I will say my hand is moving from left to right. Or if you stand in one place and you march, you bring your left leg up, then your right leg up, your legs are moving. But the remaining part of your body that is there is not going from one place to another. So that is what we mean by the term movement. Then how is locomotion different? Locomotion is when the whole body, right, goes from point A to point B. So if I'm standing right here and my whole body shifts to the other side, or where I end up going out of the frame altogether like you see here. Now what has happened? My whole body has moved out of the frame, right? It is not just one part of my body, but it's my whole body changing its position from one place to another. So that is what we mean by the term locomotion. So movement is change in position of the body part, while locomotion is where the whole body goes from one place to another. Now, where do we observe this locomotion? Who are the organisms that can locomote or go from one place to another? Well, we know we human beings have the ability to go from one place to another. If you talk about other animals also, we know that they have the ability to go from one place to another. But what about plants? Do you think plants go from one place to another? No, right? I don't see a plant getting up, walking and, going from one place to another, searching for water and carbon dioxide. Obviously, we don't see that, which is why locomotion is something which is absent in plants. But yes, we do see movements and we will understand how in this session. Then, of course, we will cover how movement and locomotion takes place in other organisms. So, these are the broad three topics that are there in this particular chapter. Now let's move on. Firstly, understanding movement and locomotion in human beings, right? Now, if I were to ask you, how is it that I'm able to move my hand? How is it that I'm able to go from one place to another? You'll tell me, ma'am, my legs are there, my hands are there, hence I'm able to move. But what is exactly there in our legs and hands that is helping us carry out all these activities? Well, we see that our entire body, not just our legs and hands, are made up of rigid, hard structures called as bones. So bones that are there are hard, very strong structures. And we see that they are the ones which provide a certain framework to the body. And of course, they are the ones which give it a certain shape. So if my hands look a certain way, if my legs look a certain way, or if my body in itself looks a certain way, it is because of the bones, right? And we see that bones that are there, we don't have just one single very big bone in our body, but the human body is made up of 206 bones, and together these 206 bones have a proper framework, or they end up forming a skeleton, or what we call as a skeletal system. Now, what are the functions of the skeletal system? Well, first and foremost, as discussed, we see that it provides a certain framework to the body and certain shape. So point number one that we will discuss about the human skeletal system is that it is responsible for providing a framework and support to the body. Secondly, we see that they play a very important role in protection. Now, our body is made up of so many important organs like the brain, the heart, the lungs, right? And various other organs. Now, all these organs are very delicate and very important. And all the time, we are, especially when we go out to play or anything, we may hurt ourselves or, we may get an injury. But it's important that when we fall down or by mistake we hurt ourselves, our organ shouldn't get damaged, which is why in order to provide protection, we have the skeletal system or the bones that are there. Now, along with this, we also see that the main reason why we are studying it in this chapter is that they help us with movement and locomotion. So, if they ask you, and this they can ask you in the examination, what are the 3 functions of the human skeletal system? So if they were to ask you this, these are the 3 pointers that you should write down. So please star mark this in your textbook, right? So now we have understood that the human skeletal system is mainly responsible for carrying out these 3 things. Now, like I said, it's not one single bone, but rather 206 bones. And it is not 206 bones which are of the same kind. They're all different in structure. They're all different in the way they are arranged, and that is how they are able to help us in doing all the functions that we have discussed. So we have different bones starting from skull, we have vertebral column, we have clavicle, scapula, we have the rib cage, we have radius, ulna, we have so many bones, right? But on an examination point of view, what are some of the important bones that we need to learn about? So first and foremost, we need to learn about the skull. Right? So skull, as you see, is the part of the skeletal system that makes up the head region. Yes. Now we see that the skull that is there is responsible for framing our face and is also responsible for protecting the brain. Yes. Now on the other hand, we have structures like rib cage, vertebral column and pelvis. Now, if we were to look at the function of the rib cage, we see that the rib cage has a central bone which we call as the breastbone. It's a T-shaped bone right here, as you can see. Maybe I'll use a darker color to highlight. So what I've highlighted in red here is the breastbone or the sternum. And it's a T-shaped bone to which we see that there are many smaller bones that join that are called as ribs. So they are connected in front to this breastbone and at the back to the vertebral column. And we see that there are a total of 12 ribs on either side. Totally, we see that there are 24 ribs that make up the rib cage. And as you see, it forms a bird cage-like structure. So what is the function of the rib cage? See that one of the primary functions is we see that it helps in protecting important organs like the heart and the lungs, which are found in the chest region. Now along with this, we also see that the muscles which are found in between the rib cage also helps us with the process of breathing, which we will of course learn in our higher grades. Next up, of course, we have the vertebral column. So as you see, if I were to go back, the vertebral column has a slightly curved appearance, which is also commonly known as your backbone. Now the vertebral column that is there has many functions. Primary function, of course, is to protect our spinal cord. So our spinal cord is is an important part of our nervous system, and the vertebral column protects it. And they are made up of a total of 33 bones, which we call as 33 vertebrae. Now we see that the slightly curved appearance of the vertebral column is very important to us human beings because that's what gives it the flexibility. So right now I'm able to stand upright, or I'm able to bend down, touch my toes. I'm able to do all these things because of the structure of the vertebral column. So this is something that you need to remember when we discuss about the vertebral column. Next, of course, we have the pelvis. Now the pelvis, as you see, is a butterfly shaped bone. It is a butterfly shaped bone which is normally found in the abdominal region, right? So if you see, the pelvis is found a little bit at the bottom. So here, as I highlighted, it's a butterfly shaped bone. And we see that, let's say, the thigh bones are attached to part of the pelvis. Now, one of the primary functions of the pelvis is to protect some of the abdominal organs. Now, along with this, we also see that the pelvis provides a certain foundation. So the pelvis, if you see, the vertebral column gets attached to the pelvis, right? And we see that this pelvis is acting as a foundation. So there is a reason why we are able to stand upright or sit down or, let's say move the way we move as human beings. See, if you and I were to try and walk on all fours, especially when we are at this age, or let's say when we are adults, I'm not talking about sitting on our knees and crawling. I'm talking about keeping your legs on the floor and then keeping your feet on the floor and then keeping your palms. We will not walk around like, let's say, maybe a tiger. We'll not be able to walk around maybe like a cheetah. The way we walk when we are on all our fours would be very different. And that's because of this presence of pelvis, because it gives us a strong foundation for the way we are as human beings, giving it our structure. So these are some important functions that you need to know about the pelvis. Now there are various other small bones that make up our body. For example, we have the humerus, the radius and ulna that make up our arm. Then of course we have the carpals, metacarpals and phalanges. Now the carpals that are there are mainly the wrist bones that we see, and they're arranged a certain way. Similarly, along with that we have tarsals, metatarsals and phalanges that all make up the feet of our legs. And as you see, they're all different in structure, they're all different in the way they are arranged, thereby doing various functions, helping us carry out various activities. Now you understand that there are totally 206 bones, and we see that these 206 bones are not just randomly sitting in our body, but rather they are all connected to each other, or they are all joined with each other, right? Most bones, I would say. Now the point at which, let's say, two bones meet, right? So the point at which two bones meet is what we call as a joint, right? So what are joints? Joints are points where, or the point where two bones meet and thereby facilitate some kind of movement is what we call as a joint. And in our body, we have different types of joint. We have the hinge joint, we have the pivot joint, we have the ball and socket and saddle joint. So first up, let us have a look at the hinge joint, right? So the first one we will discuss is the hinge joint. Now the hinge joint is what we find in our elbows and in our knees, right? Which is why it's often known as the knee joint or the elbow joint. Now here the joint is attached like that of a door, right? So we see that there is one bone which is attached in a fashion where there is only forward and backward movement possible, right? So we see that only forward and backward movement is possible. You cannot rotate your knee you cannot rotate your elbow 360 degrees, right? Which is why common type of movement we find is forward and backward. And how is it like? It is similar to the movement of a door, right? Which is why we call it as a door hinge. Similar to the movement of a door hinge, hence the name hinge joint. Now second up, we have the next one, which is the ball and socket joint, right? So the second one we're going to discuss is ball and socket joint. Now this is something we find in our shoulders and we find it in our hip region. Now if you talk about how I can move my arms, right, which is attached to my shoulder, you see that I can move it 300, I can move it entirely, I can rotate it, I can go up and down, right, I can go front and back. So all kinds of movement are possible. This is because the ball that is there in let's say in the humerus bone, right? So we see that there is a ball-like structure present in one bone which fits onto a socket. Hence the name ball and socket. And we see that all types of movement is possible here. Now next up, we see that we have the third kind of joint, which is called as the pivot joint. So the pivot joint that we see is found in our neck region, where there is one bone which is fitted around another bone, right? Now there's one bone which is fixed and the other bone moves around it. Just like how there is a pivot in a basketball, right? So one part is fixed and then you move, right? You move. The other part moves, where we see that one part of the bone moves when it is fixed on another bone. So in this case, we see that in our neck region, we have this kind of pivot joint, and the bones that are involved are the axis and the atlas. Now in this particular case, what we see is the various kinds of movement that we see in our neck region is possible because of the pivot joint. Now the last one that we see is the saddle joint, which is present in our thumb, where one bone is fitted onto the other, just like how if you and I were to sit on a horse, right? So if you and I were to sit on a horse, how would we sit on it? We would put our legs on either side, and the horse seat or the saddle would be fit in this manner, right? So if this is me, I will put my legs on either side. So thereby, this kind of bones are also attached just the way you and I would sit on a horse, right? Or how we place the saddle on the horse. So we see that the thumb is a very good example of the same. Now in this particular case, one very important point to see is that there are a category of joints which cannot be moved, and we call them as immovable joints. Now immovable joints that are there are commonly found in the skull, right? So we see that the skull is mainly made up of joints that cannot move. So we call them as immovable joints. And the only part of the skull which can move is the lower jaw, right? So only the lower jaw is able to go back and forth, and that's how we are able to speak. Now another important point that we need to learn is that two bones, right? So if I'm saying two bones are connected to each other. Now it is not that two bones, if let's say this is bone 1 and I have bone 2, right? And I have bone 2 which is attached like this. It is not that they will sit like two pieces of a puzzle, but rather we see that there are various bands, right? So you can think of it as fibrous structures or various bands that will attach them and keep them in position. So these structures that connect two bones are what we call as ligaments, right? So we call them as ligaments. Now bones, like I told you, are very hard and rigid, right? So we see that these bones that are there are pretty hard and rigid. So we need to ensure that if they keep, especially where they are moving, if two hard surfaces keep rubbing against each other, what will happen? They will destroy the surface of each other, right? Which is why we need to give it a certain kind of protection or coating. So if you were to look closely, right? If we were to look closely, we see that there are these structures, spongy, soft structures called as cartilages. Now, where do we find cartilage? We find it on the surface, especially at the point where the two bones are meeting or at the joint, right? So, we find them here. And what do they act as? They act as cushions, right? They act as cushions so that the two hard surfaces don't rub against each other. But if two soft surfaces rub against each other, it is okay. So we find that cartilage, which is a soft, spongy structure, we see that that is found on the outer surface of the bones at the joints, right? And what is the function of cartilage? In order to act as a cushion, yes? So this is all about joints, type of joints and cartilage. But you see, movement in our body, if we had only bones, right, we would move like robots. Yes, because if you see, it's just forward, backward, it is just up and down, it is rotating. So it's very robotic. Yes, but yet our body is able to do a lot of flexible movement. So what is the reason behind it? The reason behind it is the presence of muscles. So muscles are flexible structures that are attached to the bones, and they are attached with the help of structures called as tendons. So what do tendons do? Tendons are responsible for connecting muscle to the bone, right? So they make sure that they are connected. Now, a very interesting property about muscles is that they can only pull. So like I said, muscles are these special kind of structures we see. And muscles, if you see, they are made up of structures wherein they can only pull in one direction. So this is a muscle. When it pulls, we see that it will contract. So think of it as rubber bands which can move only in one direction. They cannot be extended in the other direction. So we say that muscles contract and they relax, which means they contract and pull, then they relax and go back to their original place. Which is why we see that in order for muscular movement to happen or flexible movement, muscles work in pairs. So if I want to do this movement, I have a certain kind of muscle pulling it in this direction. But if I want to bring it back, I have another kind of muscle which will pull in the opposite direction so that I can do the opposite activity. So we see that muscles contract and relax and they work in pairs, right? Now, of course, we've already covered the topic of cartilage, which is nothing but they are found in the soft parts. They as hard as bones. They're found at the end of long bones, and they're also found at the tip of the nose and in the upper part of the ear. So with this, we have covered all about how we have movement and locomotion in our body and how all these structures help and facilitate that. Now next up, let's have a look at gait in other animals. Now it is not that every animal moves the same way as we do. Now if you look at fishes, they are found underwater. Now what helps the fish move? Now of course we know that fishes do have bones, but they also have structures called as fins which are present on their body that move back and forth like a fan. Along with that, they have a tail that keep moving and they keep changing the direction. And along with that, they have a streamlined body that helps them cut through the water. Now on the other hand, if you look at birds, birds have the ability to fly. They're not even on land. So most birds have the ability to fly. And what are the structures that help them? They do have bones again. But these bones are hollow and they have air sacs in them. And they have a special kind of bone which is called as the keel bone, wherein we see that the strong flight muscles of the bird attach. And their forearms that are there are modified into wings that are covered with feathers. So again, their body is very lightweight. They have feathers, all of which enable them to fly. And along with that, their body is again streamlined that helps them cut through the air. Now we have cockroaches, which are insects that can not only walk on ground, they're able to climb upwards, let's say on a wall, they're able to fly, they're able to do all of these things. Now unlike the fishes and the birds which have bones in them, these guys do not have that. They don't have any bones. But rather we see that they have these muscles which are there that help them walk. And of course we also see that they have 3 pairs of legs and wings that help them fly. Now another extreme case that we have are the earthworms. Now all the earthworms have a muscular body wherein we see that there are longitudinal muscles and circular muscles. So they have 2 types of muscles which help them contract and relax and slowly slime forward. And in order to get grip, they have bristles or hair-like structures. Now you see that another category are the snails. Now snails again have a muscular foot which again helps them go forward and they leave a slimy trail. Last but not the least, we have snakes. Now snakes we think have no bones in them. Ma'am, I don't think they have bones because I don't see any hands and legs. Now despite the fact that snakes have no limbs, they do have bones in them. And we see that they have a very long backbone and a lot of strong muscles that help them, slither in the ground. So if you see, structures like muscles and bones are not just found in our body, but rather we find them in other organisms as well which help them move. Now the last topic we will cover are movement in plants. Now when we talk about movement, like I said, you don't find locomotion where a plant is going to get up and go. But then you might also tell me that how is movement possible in plants? Because plants cannot wave by, plants cannot flap their hands just like I do, right? So it's very difficult in such cases. So what do we see? Things might not be the same, right? So movement might be very different, let's say in you and me versus plants. In the case of plants, we see that there is blooming of flowers, we see that sudden drooping of leaves, like in touch me not plant, are all examples of movement because there is change in position of the structure. So with this everyone, if you see, we have covered all the important topics which are there from the chapter, that is body movements. Really sorry that my bottle was there and it could have probably been distracting. So really sorry about that. But nonetheless, I hope that all of you enjoyed this class. If you did, students, do not forget to hit the like button on this video. And of course, as you all know, learning is made more fun when you watch it or when you visualize it. And especially that goes for biology. So if you see in the link of this video, you will find a link to our Shopify website, wherein if you want to get the premium experience of learning and experiencing all these topics that we have just discussed, you can check out the BYJU'S, the learning app, and that too the premium version of it, wherein, see, you will not just learn these concepts, you will experience these concepts. And of course, most importantly, we will get you exam ready there as well, because we have an entire revise section that is going to help you get you exam ready. So a lot of questions, practice papers, mock papers, everything which is available. So I would recommend that you go and you check it out. So thank you so much everybody for staying with me till the very end. Hoping to see you soon again. Up until then, take care, lots of love, and bye-bye.